All right, guys, we want to do a video on strength training for runners. We know a lot of runners are starting to incorporate strength training into their programs, which is perfect and something we want to see. And we wanted to just do a quick video on what boxes we feel like need to be checked. And really, they're the boxes that are just fundamental components of strength training. They're kind of the pillars of strength training. They're squatting, hinging, lunging or single leg movements, pressing, pulling, lower leg work, and that one's going to be real specific to runners. And then something that's going to really challenge proximal stability or train good kind of core coordination. So we'll start kind of with a squat. So a squat is a movement that is going to obviously strengthen primarily our quads. They're going to be our kind of big movers in a squat pattern. But squat is also going to help us with vertical force production, which is going to be important from a running efficiency standpoint. And from a quad strengthening standpoint, it's going to create a little bit more robustness for us. For whether we're putting in a lot of miles or whether we're hitting some downhills. The stronger our quads are, the better off we're going to be. We like to see a lot of variations to squat, so it could be back squat, it could be front squat, it could be goblet squat. I mean, you name it, box squats. We can put a lot of different variations into squat, kind of depending on where you're starting, but a squat is a must-have movement in a runner strength training program. Next, we go to a hip hinge or like a deadlift position. A conventional deadlift for us is often where we're going to start, but again, we can see a lot of different variations here. We could do some sumo stance. We can maybe focus more on RDLs, which target a little bit more of the hamstring. But the reason why we want to see a good hip hinge movement is that we want to really access the glutes, and we want to see the glutes really working hard in hip extension. So if a squat is working a little bit more on vertical force production, our deadlift is going to help us with a little bit more horizontal or moving forward as we work through our gait mechanics. So again, building up strong glutes, building up the ability to extend through the hip and be strong in those positions is vitally important. Next, we go to a lunge position or some sort of single leg loaded movement. Lunging is fantastic because it gives us the ability to get a leg into hip extension, which is obviously going to be important for us from a running perspective. Obviously, as we work through our gait, we are going to, as our back leg comes through, we want to be able to extend the hip efficiently. And not be getting into our low back and having the pelvis anteriorly tilt too far and creating a hinge mechanic at the back. So exposing the hip to hip extension in the strength environment, it can be really beneficial and something that can translate for us into translate directly to our running mechanics. And then we can also work on single leg movement, so single leg deadlifting, step ups, single leg squats. Again, lots of variety here. All of which are going to help us strengthen our single leg movement and positions. Again, from a running perspective, right, running is going to be all single leg. It is just a series of single leg hops. And so the stronger, more robust we are in single leg strength movements, the better for our running. So we really want to make sure that we feel really stable and strong in those movements. Next, we go to some upper body work. We don't want to neglect the upper body. This is something that for a lot of runners may not always be that much of a priority, and it probably doesn't need to be as big of a priority as lower leg or lower body strength training is, but I think it's something we still want to be focusing on. So we like to really, from my perspective, for running particularly, not that, I'd love to get some bench press in, don't get me wrong, but I think from a running perspective, we probably focus a little bit more on some overhead pressing. The reason being is that's going to get our shoulders into an overhead position, which from a long-term shoulder health perspective is going to be beneficial. And then as well, it's going to challenge us to be really efficient at maintaining a stable trunk. So that proximal stability, that kind of relationship between our rib cage and our pelvis, making sure that we're not getting into overextended positions is really vital for runners. And so it's a good way for us to challenge our ability to maintain good proximal stability. Sticking with upper body, we could go over to some rowing, whether it be ring rows or a bent over dumbbell row, whether that's supported or non-supported. Non-supported, again, going to help us really start to work on developing greater proximal stability and really control that that relationship between the rib cage and the pelvis, not getting into an environment where we're creating kind of an extension hinge point in the low back, which is something that can be fairly common for runners. So upper body strength training is a great way for us to really train that control and strength. And next, guys, what we do is focus on lower leg, specifically calf work, and some foot strengthening work as well. So this is going to be real specific for runners, although a lot of people can benefit from these movements. But this can look like movements, you know, just like a seated bent knee calf raise with a dumbbell on our knees, standing calf raises. There's a lot of variety here that we can throw in as well, and we really do want to strengthen our calves. Our calves are the workhorses of running, particularly for distance running, but for all running. If it's not something that we're specifically working on, it needs to be. Running is not sufficient enough to strength train the calves. You need to be doing some weight training, i.e. weighted calf raises, things like that, to really build a robust lower leg. And one thing that we can do to enhance the benefit of some of the lower leg work is get out of our shoes or make sure we're getting into minimalist footwear. Honestly, I think that's something you can do for all of your strength training from a running perspective, but specifically for lower leg work, especially getting out of your running shoes, either getting barefoot or into minimalist footwear, is going to allow us to also work on building foot strength, which is vitally important for runners as well. And then last, we'd finish up with some core. And again, really the core work is going to be centered around proximal stability, our ability to maintain a stable position between the pelvis and the rib cage, meaning that we're not getting too much excessive rotation, or that we're not getting excessive pelvic tilt, i.e. forward, is generally going to be the issue for our runners. And the reason being is it can create issues for people's backs when it comes to running, but also we want good proximal stability because that allows us to really derive a lot of force, a lot of efficient force off of the ground as we are running and each foot is making contact to the ground. So a core that is really unstable or it's got a lot of movement in it, we start to bleed some of that force production efficiency. So having some core work in, it can look things like planking, dead bugs, side plank marching, Copenhagen planks. Again, a lot of variation that we can put in here, but a lot of different movements that are going to be really important. Those are the boxes that we feel like are really vital for all runners to be checking. And I think as you incorporate these things into your training program, if you're a runner, I think you will find massive, massive benefit to a well-rounded strength training program.